Welcome back to As It Turned Out, hosted by your favorite CU junior, Panana Maruna. This is the podcast about the messy, beautiful process of figuring it out as we go. We're not here for perfect paths. We're here for the moments of doubt, the big pivots, and the quiet wins that don't make it into our LinkedIns. We're talking about what it actually looks like to grow, adapt, and make our own way, one unexpected move at a time. Let's get into it. Today, I'm sitting down with John Sterling, an environmental leader whose career has been shaped by a passion for conservation, the outdoors, and creating meaningful impact. From his early experiences in the outdoor industry to leading major conservation efforts, his path has been anything but traditional. In this episode, we're going to talk about the moments that shaped his career, the pivots that defined his leadership, and what it means to build a life around purpose-driven work. Because as it turns out, even the most meaningful careers don't follow a straight line. So let's dive into his journey and see how things actually turned out. When you were growing up, what did you imagine your career would look like, and how close did that end up being to how it actually turned out?
Oh my. Growing up, I had no career ideas or ambitions. And I remember taking a little survey in high school, which asked us to, talk about where we thought we might want to be in career. And I had no idea back then. And I don't think my career goals really kicked in till my mid-20s.
Yeah. So kind of like when you were leaving high school, where did you have ideas of what you might want to study or what you thought you might go into?
I was fortunate. I had parents who didn't put a lot of pressure on me to have that all figured out. They were both journalists, and so they understood the value of a liberal arts education.
Yeah.
So when I went off to college, I started out as an English major and switched to history and graduated with a history degree, which qualified me for kind of nothing and everything at the same time.
Yeah.
I'm a big believer in the ability to think and reason and write, and that serves you well in a whole bunch of different fields.
Definitely. I mean, that's core to just creativity, and creativity is in every aspect of life.
Yeah, and it's my sister's an archaeologist, and she has this thing she likes to say that in human cultures, specialists die and generalists survive. And so I've always kind of embraced that if you're good at a lot of different things, but maybe not necessarily expert in any one area, you're probably going to do okay and have more options for yourself.
And you're probably going to understand the world better, truly.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a big part of education is getting out there and touching the world rather than just reading about it.
Definitely. I know you've traveled and worked in so many places throughout your career. How do you kind of think travel has shaped the way you see your world and how you see yourself?
That's a great question because I think the first real epiphany I had about what I wanted to do with my life work-wise came while I was traveling in India back in the early 90s. I was volunteering for a rural development organization in southern India that did all sorts of community development work, including watershed restoration. And I had grown up in the Pacific Northwest like you, and with parents who made sure that we spent a lot of time outdoors. So I always really appreciated the environment and wild places and natural landscapes. And I found myself halfway around the world helping a small village in India protect its watersheds. And I had this realization that I could be doing this here in India, or I could go back home and try to protect forests and rivers and things like that in the U.S. And so I came back from that trip, and at that point was kind of determined to uh, get a job in the environmental field. But without that travel experience and that sense of what the rest of the world is like, not that I saw all of it or anything like that, but made me realize how special what we have here in the U.S. is. And so I was quite determined to do what I could to protect that.
So that's amazing. You're having the global perspective enough to see it where you're from. I think is really interesting. I think people don't always realize how much you learn about your home when you're away from it, kind of.
Yeah, I think we can all be citizens of the world, but ultimately we are from one place, and that's pretty deeply ingrained in all of us. So, I think understanding the world and caring about the world, but acting on your local level is a good way to go.
Yeah. Well, I know you've worked across journalism, nonprofit leadership, corporate sustainability, and consulting. So kind of looking back on all of those big fields, but what kind of connects all of those chapters to you?
Well, I think for me, it was first understanding what my passion was. And in terms of how I wanted to spend my work time, it had to do with the environment, conservation, protecting wild places. And that, again, really kind of harkened back to that epiphany I had in India. But when I got back, I didn't really know how to apply myself to that. So again, I was a history major. I was a pretty good writer. My parents were journalists. And one of the first opportunities I saw, I was living in Berkeley at the time, was an internship in an environmental magazine in San Francisco. And so that for me kind of brought together a skill that I had, which was writing, uh, with my passion and my interest in having work that reflected my values. So writing for an environmental group seemed to make a lot of sense. And that led to, I'd also worked part time at an outdoor industry company called Sierra Designs in Berkeley. And that combination of environmental experience plus outdoor industry experience made me competitive for a job at Patagonia, where I was hired in 1996 to run Patagonia's environmental grants program. So I moved from the Bay Area down to the Ventura area and spent the next 7 years working for Patagonia. So I wasn't necessarily, it wasn't necessarily my ambition to go work for a big or a medium-sized company like that, but because there was a job there that embraced my commitment to the environment, it was a perfect fit. And
Yeah.
then after that, if you want me to keep going, after that, Patagonia had co-founded an organization, a nonprofit called the Conservation Alliance, which the goal of the organization was to recruit outdoor industry companies into a membership. Each member would pay annual dues into a central fund, and then the organization gives all that money away to environmental organizations. So I represented Patagonia on the board of the Conservation Alliance while I was there. And then as I was made the decision to leave Patagonia, the Conservation Alliance had never had paid staff. And I asked my fellow board members, hey, if I can raise the money to staff the Conservation Alliance, would you be supportive of that? And they all said yes. So I spent the next almost 20 years as executive director of the Conservation Alliance, which kept me rooted in the outdoor industry and in conservation. So, long story short, I think the through lines were all that is a commitment to conservation and the environment. But I always really enjoyed the interface of business and values like environmental values. So that's what I've done.
Yeah. Wow. That's so impressive. I mean, it's so interesting that you really led that forefront because I know you joined before sustainability and conservation was really at the forefront of everybody's mind. What's something that you think people misunderstood back then about the relationship between business and environmental responsibility?
Oh man, well back then the main talking point about the environment was you can have jobs or you can have a protected environment, but you can't have both.
Wow.
So a pretty common theme in dialogue around conservation and environmentalism was jobs versus the environment. So if you protect forests, you're putting loggers out of business. If you protect rivers, you're putting barging industries or fishing, commercial fishing out of business. And all throughout my career, I've worked at places that really push back against that pretty tired trope and tried to demonstrate that there are jobs that support a clean environment. So the Conservation Alliance was a great example where we had 250 businesses that understood that protecting wild places was really important for their companies that mostly made products for, backpacking, camping, climbing, paddling, things like that.
Yeah.
If you don't have protected rivers, forests, mountains, and deserts, it's going to be harder to sell the outdoor gear and clothing that people need to explore those places. So there was some enlightened self-interest in there. I'd say all those companies truly believe that places had an inherent value and should be protected, but we also demonstrated that healthy landscapes and healthy waterways propped up a really important economic driver.
Yeah. And through that, you had to use sales to convince all those people too. So you really were using pretty much every aspect of the business structure to try to get
Oh
this.
yeah, every time we tried to recruit a new member into the Conservation Alliance, whether they said it or not, you could tell they were thinking, "What's in this for me?" And so and that's okay. Like, I think it's even with things that are core values, I think you have to be able to sell those ideas and persuade people that, it's not necessarily enough to be the right thing to do, but it also has to make sense for them, in a business sense.
Yeah. I mean, kind of through that with working with so many companies, what did that kind of teach you about leadership and collaboration when it came to just trying to bring people together through that?
Yeah, and that's a really insightful question. It's interesting because the outdoor industry is a very competitive space,
Mhm.
and with the Conservation Alliance, what we tried to do was establish a place where brands could come together, kind of check their competition at the door, and work for something bigger than them that would outlast any of them. And what I learned was in a very competitive environment, there is room for collaboration and cooperation when people have shared values. So, it was fun. Our four founding member companies were Patagonia, The North Face, REI, and Kelty.
Wow.
And, Patagonia and the North Face in particular always had a very competitive past and still very competitive with each other. But the fact that they came together to establish this nonprofit that would ensure protection for wild spaces, I think is just a great example of how you can get businesses to work together in one arena when they're duking it out in the marketplace.
Yeah. I mean, the fact that you were able to bring all those competitive companies together is crazy because I mean, there's so many spaces where you just really can't these days. People are so ready to take sides, especially with everything happening in the world.
Yeah, that's true. And what I learned about leadership was, especially in a business sense, if you're working, as I did at Patagonia and then later at the Conservation Alliance, if you're working on values rather than, say, product, um, there's not as much expertise in the business world on that kind of stuff. Maybe there is more now than there was in the 90s. So if you're someone, and I was fortunate to be in this position, who is in a position to articulate why those values are important, a lot of business leaders who ordinarily might be intimidating to a guy who, like me, who just has this kind of nonprofit background, uh, were very deferential, and they knew what they didn't know. And if I could demonstrate that there was a critical mass of support for protecting wilderness or national monuments or wild and scenic rivers in the outdoor industry, then we built trust, and those business leaders really kind of fell in line, uh, because they understood that this was more our area of expertise, and if we could keep that team together, they'd be all for it.
Yeah. A lot of your work seems to have like centered around purpose-driven leadership. Kind of over time, how has your definition of success evolved personally and professionally through having to work with all these companies that were more business minded, but excited about joining your community you were making?
Yeah, it's funny. After 7 years at Patagonia, I had this sense Patagonia likes to be out in front. They don't, and I would say this to their faces today. They're not necessarily followers, and so the Conservation Alliance was an interesting thing for Patagonia to have co-founded. But after 7 years there, as eventually I was director of environmental programs there. I'd moved beyond just running the grant program. It was kind of our way or the highway. And then shifting over to the Conservation Alliance, um, it, it was an opportunity to try out some of the things we did at Patagonia on a much bigger scale. And we succeeded in that. And so getting to your question, what does success look like? I think looking back on my career, the thing I'm most proud of is that we were able to build a community amongst hundreds of businesses around shared values that weren't just jacking up sales and, coming up with the newest, greatest product. That there was for and I think there still is a very strong sense of community within the outdoor industry around the environment, around conservation, and around working together to ensure that those things happen. So for me, that was a great success. I think in the bigger picture, I always wanted to make sure that I went to work every day believing in what I was doing.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people compromise on that because they got bills to pay or they have, um, you know, maybe they want to make more money or whatever it is. But I've never regretted a decision I made that was rooted in a commitment to those values. And sometimes it took me on a circuitous path, but I firmly believe that if you commit yourself to something you believe in, you'll feel successful in the end.
Yeah. I mean, I always think it's great to love what you do, but to be passionate about what you do is really, I mean, that's the goal, isn't it?
Yeah, and to feel like at the end of the day, what you're doing makes a difference in the world, makes a
Mhm.
difference beyond your selfish needs, and that hopefully you can leave something behind after you're dead and gone.
Yeah. Yeah, I think making that positive impact and trying to make the world better than we found it is really all we can do as humans.
Yeah, yeah. Unfortunately, not everyone does that. But I think a lot of people aren't. They either nobody ever told them they could do that, or um, it's so easy to get sucked into something else, and I did. It was interesting running a nonprofit in a business sector. Our board was comprised entirely of leaders from the outdoor industry and from our member companies, and
Mhm.
I saw time and again new board members would come in and it was like they were having a career crisis or a midlife crisis or whatever it was, but they maybe had 10 or 20 years of selling product, and they had this moment of like, God, is this all there is? I've had a successful career, but somehow I feel empty. And so having them come to the Conservation Alliance and serve as board members, they found a great deal of meaning in that, in a way that really added to their career experience. And they were great board members because they were very passionate and they understood how to run a business, and that was there was a great attribute to have on a nonprofit board.
Yeah. And that's great. It's kind of telling people stories about what is happening in this world and trying to make people understand that. How did you navigate that kind of tension between idealism and practicality when it came to trying to tell people how important it was to care about this?
I came into this work uh, as an idealist, and over time, I wouldn't say I got cynical, but I understood the value of meeting people where they are and bringing them along. And so when I first got involved with the Conservation Alliance, we had about 40 member companies, and we were giving away $150,000 a year. And by the time I left, we had about 250 members, and we were giving away north of $2 million a year. And we did that by creating a nucleus of support for what we were trying to accomplish and slowly growing it incrementally over time. And, we never got too far ahead of our membership. We had to make sure that they were comfortable where we were headed, but we weren't going to out sprint them to get there. And a lot of that was recognizing that the companies in our membership had, they had a lot of different demands and pressures on their business, on their time, and things like that. So, but it's just slowly over time, recognizing and demonstrating that you can balance the needs of a business with these greater values. And I have very few instances where businesses dropped out saying this just isn't worth it. We would lose members periodically because recessions or whatever it might be, but it was never like, I don't, this just doesn't work with our business model. They understood it.
I mean, yeah, and you can never get 100% of people. You can get most people involved. But like, yeah, kind of with that, this is a great question I like to ask people to bring some realism for us college students looking at this crazy career ahead. Was there kind of a point in your career where things didn't go according to plan, or where you felt uncertain about what came next? And how did that experience shape kind of how you saw impact?
Boy, that's a good question. I'd say there were two crossroads. I right out of college, I was splitting my time between an outdoor retailer and a part-time job in an environmental group. And that was bumping along for a few years. And there was a point where I was like, God, where is this headed? Like, I felt like, why am I splitting my time between the environment and the outdoor industry? Is there a path here? And I had people in my life telling me like, God, I don't see what you're doing. And frankly, I wasn't thinking too strategically about it, but I had this feeling that, the outdoor thing fed the personal side of my life, where I love to be out climbing, skiing, backpacking, that kind of thing. And the environmental work really fed my passion for protecting wild places. And there wasn't much of a roadmap to how to bring those two together in a job. And I was kind of on the verge of giving up and trying something different when this job opening came at Patagonia, and they hired me in part because I had that mix of outdoor industry and environmental experience. So that was one crossroads where, sometimes you feel like what you're doing is really challenged in logically, and if you really believe in it, you got to persevere, and things will work out. And then I think the next crossroads for me, where I was a little uncertain, was after 7 years at Patagonia, making the decision to leave, which on paper, a lot of people thought I was crazy. I was the director of environmental programs at a company that everyone wants to work for, and I was getting paid every day to do environmental work, give money away to environmental groups, think of campaigns that the company could engage in to amplify environmental issues. And my wife and I made the decision to leave Patagonia in Southern California and moved back to Oregon. And people thought we were a little bit crazy, but we landed in Bend, which is a place we moved to for quality of life and to get closer to family, and it all worked out. I had a vision for how we could make a living here in Bend, and it took a couple of years to get that going, but it did all work out. So, those aren't stories of failure or when the plan didn't really work. But I think it's really important for young people to realize that every now and then you have to take a risk, and you might hear voices in your head and from people outside of your head telling you that you're blowing it. But if you really believe in what you're doing, I in my experience, it does work out.
Yeah. I love that. I mean, that's how I was raised. I was raised to always say yes to everything. And I
Yeah.
just think that's kind of what makes us human, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think, I have two college age kids, and they both were in high school during COVID. And I think your generation, there there's a lot of fear and anxiety, and risk is a challenging thing for a lot of people. Um, but I've found that the harder something feels going into it, the more rewarding it is when you move through it. And you got to take those risks, especially at a young age. That's the time to roll the dice a little bit, because the older you get, the more your life kind of gets funneled into a certain direction. So kind of embrace that opportunity to try a bunch of things in your 20s and see what sticks.
Yeah, definitely. I kind of always like to end my podcast with this. But if an early career version could see yourself and where you ended up today, what do you think would surprise him about how it all actually turned out?
Oh my goodness. Uh, I think the whole thing would be a surprise. I mean, when you're a fresh college graduate, you're just kind of trying to figure things out. Everything seems possible and everything seems impossible. And I just found that I had to surf the wave that was in front of me and see what happened next, and I. But anyway, I think my 22-year-old self would look at me now and go, "Oh, wow, that kind of worked out." But I would not have been able to anticipate the path that unfurled in front of me.
I love that. Yeah, I don't think anyone really can.
Yeah, yeah. And don't expect that you will. It's just if you overscript something from the beginning, there's bound to be disappointing detours. So, be flexible and just navigate the best you can.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much. This has been great.
Yeah, thank you. I enjoyed that.
Thank you so much for tuning in to As It Turned Out. If this episode inspired you or made you feel differently about your own path, share it with someone who'd love it too. And if you know anyone with a story worth telling, someone who took the long way, changed directions, or built a life they never expected, send them my way. Until next time, thanks for being here.